A first-class ticket isn't just a seat, it's a promise of respect. For Maya Washington, flying on Aura Airlines, Flight 729, that promise was shattered. Dressed in a simple hoodie, the young black woman was met with suspicion and contempt from the one man who held everyone's safety in his hands, the pilot. Captain Mark Harrison, a man with a flawless record and a deep-seated arrogance, took one look at her and made a fatal judgment, labeling her a fake VIP. He had no idea his whispered insult intended to humiliate would trigger a catastrophic chain reaction. This is the story of how a pilot's prejudice didn't just cost him his job, it threatened to ground an entire airline and expose the ugly truth hiding behind a billion-dollar brand. The controlled chaos of Chicago O'Hare International Airport was a familiar symphony to Maya Washington. The rhythmic roll of suitcases, the cacophony of final boarding calls, the low hum of thousands of intersecting journeys, it was the sound of movement, of purpose. And today, Maya had a purpose. She was flying home to New York to surprise her father for his 60th birthday. At 28, Maya had carved a name for herself entirely separate from her family's legacy. She was a celebrated graphic novelist, known for her poignant stories that wove together urban fantasy and sharp social commentary. Her success was her own, built on talent, relentless hard work, and a unique perspective. It was a point of quiet pride for her and for her father that she never needed to use his name to open doors. In fact, she preferred it that way. Today she looked the part of a creative professional on a travel day, a comfortable, slightly oversized grey university hoodie, dark leggings and well-worn sneakers. Her hair was pulled back in a neat puff, and a pair of large, noise-cancelling headphones hung around her neck. In her hands, she clutched a reinforced artist's portfolio containing the original links for her latest project, a gift for her dad. It was priceless, irreplaceable, and the only reason she'd sprung for a first-class ticket. She needed the extra space and the assurance that she could keep it with her. Her ticket, booked under M. Washington, was for seat 2A on Aura Airlines, Flight 729, Aura Airlines. The name was so deeply ingrained in her life, it felt like a part of her own DNA. She knew the precise shade of blue in the logo, the specific font used on the safety cards, the exact scent of the hot towels they served before takeoff. It was her father's airline. Richard Washington, the formidable CEO who had taken a struggling regional carrier and transformed it into an international giant, was the man she was going to surprise. As she approached Gate K-12, she saw the flight crew preparing to board. Standing with an air of unassailable authority near the cockpit door was the pilot, his silver-streaked hair and crisp white uniform marking him as the commander. He was chatting with a senior flight attendant, a blonde woman with a severe hairstyle and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Maya overheard snippets of their conversation, something about a difficult landing in Denver last week. The pilot's voice was a low, self-assured baritone, the kind that brooked no argument. He was Captain Mark Harrison, a 30-year veteran of the skies. Harrison was a pilot of the old school. He believed in hierarchy discipline and the pristine image of air travel. He saw himself not just as a pilot, but as the master of his domain, the aluminum tube that hurtled through the sky at 600 miles per hour. His passengers were his cargo, his crew were his subordinates, and his word was law. Over the years, his confidence had calcified into a rigid arrogance, and a subtle but persistent set of biases had taken root in the fertile ground of his authority. As the gate agent announced boarding for first-class passengers, Maya joined the short line. When her turn came, she handed over her phone with the boarding pass displayed. The agent scanned it with a polite smile. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Washington. Enjoy your flight." Maya stepped onto the jet bridge, and as she passed the cockpit, Captain Harrison's eyes swept over her. It was a brief, dismissive glance, but it was potent. His eyes took in the hoodie, the leggings, the casual demeanor, and his brow furrowed in a flicker of disapproval. He saw a young woman who, in his estimation, didn't fit the profile of his first-class cabin. He then looked at the flight attendant, Brenda Jenkins, and gave a subtle, almost imperceptible shake of his head. Brenda, a loyal sycophant who mirrored her captain's worldview, understood the silent communication perfectly. Maya felt the chill of that look, but brushed it off. She'd encountered dismissive glances before. It was the tax she paid for moving through the world in a way that made her comfortable for refusing to dress according to others' expectations. She found her seat 2A, a luxurious pod by the window, and carefully slid her precious portfolio into the space between her seat and the fuselage wall. She settled in, eager for the flight to begin, eager to see her father. She had no idea that the silent judgment passed in the doorway of the plane was not an end, but a beginning. It was the first gust of wind before a Category 5 hurricane. The first-class cabin of Aura Airlines' flagship Airbus A321 was an oasis of curated calm. Soft lighting, muted greys, and the airline's signature blue accents created a serene environment. The hushed tones of the other passengers' businessmen in tailored suits, an older couple speaking quietly in French, added to the atmosphere of exclusive tranquility. Maya was beginning to relax her headphones now, over her ears, listening to a lo-fi jazz playlist as she double-checked the clasps on her portfolio. A flight attendant approached her, a young woman with a warm, genuine smile. "Can I get you something to drink before we take off, miss?" she asked. "Just some water, please." "Thank you," Maya replied, returning the smile. The flight attendant, whose name tag read Chloe, nodded and moved on. A moment later, the senior flight attendant, Brenda Jenkins, appeared at her side. Her smile was a stark contrast to Chloe's. It was a thin, painted-on veneer of professionalism. "Ma'am," Brenda began, her voice tight, "I'm going to need to place that item in an overhead bin. It can't be stored on the floor during takeoff and landing." She gestured vaguely toward the portfolio. "Oh, it's not on the floor," Maya explained, calmly pointing. "It's secured right here beside me. It's very fragile, and I'd really prefer to keep it with me. It fits perfectly and isn't obstructing anything." She had flown this way with her art before and knew it was within regulations. Brenda's smile tightened further. "Airline policy is very clear. All larger items must be stowed overhead for safety." "I understand, but it's really not a large item, and it's safer here than in a bin where it could get crushed," Maya insisted politely. "Could you perhaps double-check the regulations for specialty items? It's an art portfolio." This polite resistance seemed to irritate Brenda. It was as if Maya, by not complying immediately, was questioning her authority. "The captain is very strict about cabin security. I'll have to insist." Before Maya could respond, Captain Harrison himself emerged from the cockpit. He had apparently been listening to the exchange. He walked down the aisle with a proprietary air, his presence immediately sucking the air out of the serene cabin. "Is there a problem here?" "Brenda," he asked, his voice low and commanding. He didn't look at Maya, addressing only his flight attendant. "This passenger is refusing to stow her bag, Captain." Brenda reported a hint of vindication in her tone. Now Captain Harrison turned his gaze to Maya. It was the same dismissive look from the jet bridge, now amplified with annoyance. He didn't see a paying customer with a valid concern. He saw a problem. He saw someone out of place. "Ma'am, you heard my flight attendant. That needs to be stowed. Now," he said. It wasn't a request. It was an order. "With all due respect, Captain," Maya said, keeping her voice even, despite the knot of anger tightening in her stomach. "It's not a bag. It's a portfolio containing original artwork. It's extremely delicate and it's safely secured. I can assure you it poses no risk." Harrison leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, condescending whisper that was nonetheless loud enough for the passengers in the surrounding seats to hear. "Listen, I don't know how you got this ticket, but up here we follow the rules. All of us. We can't have the cabin cluttered with personal effects." The phrase, "how you got this ticket," dripped with insinuation. It was a direct challenge to her right to be there. The blood rushed to Maya's face, a hot tide of humiliation and fury. She was being profiled in front of an entire cabin. She took a deep breath, trying to de-escalate. "I paid for my ticket like everyone else. I am simply asking for a reasonable accommodation for a fragile item, which is standard practice on most airlines." Harrison straightened up, a smirk playing on his lips. He turned to Brenda, and in a stage whisper that carried through the quiet cabin, he delivered the line that would seal his fate. Probably another one of these influencers trying to get a free upgrade. Just check her ticket again. I bet she's a fake VIP snuck her way up here. The words hung in the air, sharp and poisonous. Fake VIP. It was a brand, a judgment, a public shaming. The businessman in 2B quickly averted his eyes, suddenly fascinated by his laptop screen. The French couple fell silent, their expressions a mixture of shock and discomfort. Chloe, the younger flight attendant who was standing nearby, looked horrified, her eyes wide with disbelief. For Maya, the world seemed to narrow to the space between her and the pilot. The quiet cabin, the hum of the engines, the faces of the other passengers, it all faded away. All that was left was the searing heat of his prejudice and the cold, hard weight of his insult. She had wanted a quiet, uneventful flight. Instead, she had been singled out, questioned and humiliated by the very man in charge of the plane, and the flight hadn't even left the ground. Humiliation is a peculiar kind of poison. It doesn't wound the body. It sears the soul. As Captain Harrison stood there, smug and self-satisfied, Maya felt a profound sense of cold fury crystallize within her. Her first instinct was to unleash the truth, to say the 6 words that would vaporize his arrogance. "My father is the CEO." But she held back. It felt like a cheap victory, a card she shouldn't have to play, just to be treated with basic human decency. Revealing her identity now would be a reaction to his bigotry. She wanted her response to be an action, deliberate and on her own terms. "Captain," she said, her voice dangerously quiet, all the previous warmth gone, replaced by steel. "There is no need to check my ticket. I am in the seat I paid for. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'd like to prepare for takeoff." Her unshakable calm seemed to unnerve him more than any outburst would have. He had expected tears or a tantrum. This cold, unwavering dignity was something his playbook hadn't prepared him for. He stared at her for a long moment, his jaw tight. "Fine," he snapped, turning on his heel. "Brenda, if that item moves an inch during the flight, you report it to me. And get her a copy of the overhead stowage regulations." He stalked back to the cockpit, a man who had won the battle, but sensed uneasily that he was losing the war. Brenda, emboldened by her captain's support, returned a few minutes later and thrust a laminated safety card into Maya's hands. "For your reference," she said with saccharine sweetness. The act was so petty, so needlessly vindictive, that Maya could only shake her head. The flight to New York was 5 hours. 5 hours of being trapped in a metal tube, breathing the same recycled air as the people who had publicly disrespected her. Every time Brenda walked past, she would give Maya's portfolio a pointed glare. Maya could feel the eyes of the other passengers on her, some sympathetic, most just awkwardly trying to ignore the situation. The man in 2B, who had initially hidden behind his laptop, discreetly passed her a note on a cocktail napkin. It simply said, "That was unacceptable. I'm a witness." Maya gave him a small, grateful nod. She tried to lose herself in her work, sketching in her notebook, but the anger was a distracting thrum beneath her skin. This wasn't just about a rude pilot. It was about the casual, confident way he had sized her up and dismissed her. It was about the uniform that gave him the power to do so without consequence. He hadn't just insulted her. He had insulted every person of color who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong in a space they had every right to occupy. About halfway through the flight, Chloe, the younger flight attendant, came by to collect trash. As she took Maya's empty water bottle, she leaned in close, her voice barely a whisper. "I am so sorry for how they treated you," she said, her eyes filled with genuine remorse. "It was unprofessional and completely out of line. Please don't think we're all like that." The simple, unsolicited kindness was a balm on Maya's raw nerves. "Thank you, Chloe," Maya whispered back. "That means a lot. If you decide to file a complaint," Chloe added, her voice trembling slightly, "and you need someone to confirm what happened, I'll tell the truth." It was a brave offer. A junior crew member openly defying her superiors was a surefire way to commit career suicide. Maya looked at the young woman, at her earnest face and her determination to do the right thing, and saw a glimmer of hope. The culture of an airline wasn't just set by the captain, it was also held in the hands of people like Chloe. "I'll remember that," Maya said, giving her a meaningful look. The interaction solidified her resolve. This was bigger than Captain Mark Harrison now. It was about the system that enabled and protected men like him. It was about the corporate culture her father had spent his life building. Did he know this cancer was festering within his company? Did he know his promise of premium service and respect was being so flagrantly violated? She pulled out her phone. There was no in-flight Wi-Fi, but she didn't need it. She opened a new text message to her father. She typed carefully the words, stark and clear, on the small screen. "Dad, I'm on Aura 729, landing at JFK in a couple of hours. I'm okay, but there was a serious incident with the flight crew, the pilot specifically. We need to talk the moment I land. Please meet me at the gate." She hit send. The message wouldn't go through until they were on the ground, but it was a promise. A storm was coming for Captain Harrison, and he was flying his plane directly into it. As Flight 729 began its descent into New York, the mood in the cabin shifted. The hum of the engines changed pitch, and the city's glittering evening sprawl emerged from beneath the clouds. For most passengers, it was the familiar, comforting ritual of arrival. For Maya, it was the start of a countdown. Captain Harrison's voice came over the intercom, smooth and professional, announcing their initial descent into JFK and thanking them for flying with Aura Airlines. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. He could project an image of calm authority while harboring such ugly prejudice. It was a performance, and Maya was about to bring the curtain down. She spent the last 20 minutes of the flight in a state of focused calm. She replayed the events in her mind, not with the hot sting of emotion, but with the cool precision of a witness preparing her testimony. The dismissive glance, the loaded phrase, "How you got this ticket?" The venomous whisper, "Fake VIP," Brenda's sycophantic cruelty, Chloe's quiet courage, the note from the man in 2B. She marshaled the facts, arranging them like soldiers for the battle ahead. This was no longer just a personal slight. It was a critical test of her father's leadership. How he handled this would define the very soul of his company. Would he dismiss it as a one-off incident, a case of a pilot having a bad day? Or would he see it for what it was, a symptom of a deep-seated cultural rot that no amount of glossy marketing could hide? As the plane touched down on the runway with a gentle bump, Maya felt a surge of adrenaline. There was no turning back. When the fasten seatbelt sign pinged off, She remained seated, letting the other first-class passengers disembark. She was in no hurry. She wanted Captain Harrison to see her. She wanted to be the last person he saw before his world unraveled. The man from 2B paused by her seat. "My name is David Chen," he said, handing her a business card. "I'm a corporate lawyer. What you experienced was blatant discrimination. If you need a statement, my contact information is on there. Don't let them sweep this under the rug." "Thank you, Mr. Chen." "I won't," Maya said, taking the card. Finally, the cabin was empty, except for Maya and the flight crew. Chloe was busy in the galley, pointedly keeping her back to the main cabin. Brenda stood near the exit, her arms crossed, a look of impatience on her face. And Captain Harrison emerged from the cockpit logbook in hand, ready to disembark and end his shift. He saw Maya still in her seat, and a flicker of annoyance crossed his face. "Flight's over, ma'am. Time to go." Maya slowly stood up, gathering her portfolio and her bag. She walked toward the exit, her movements deliberate. She stopped directly in front of him, forcing him to meet her gaze. "Captain Harrison," she said, her voice even and clear. "I just wanted to thank you for the memorable flight. I'm sure it's one neither of us will forget." He smirked, misinterpreting her words as the empty threat of a disgruntled passenger. "Glad we could be of service," he said dismissively. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we have post-flight checks to complete." He gestured for her to leave, turning to say something to Brenda. It was in that moment, as Maya stepped from the aircraft onto the jet bridge, that his world tilted on its axis. Waiting just inside the terminal, at the precise point where passengers meet the gate, was a small, formidable delegation. At its center stood Richard Washington. Even in a simple black suit, he commanded an aura of immense power. He wasn't smiling. His face was a mask of grim concern. Flanking him were two of the airline's most senior executives, Eleanor Vance, the sharp, no-nonsense head of in-flight services, and Marcus Thorne, the airline's chief legal officer. Captain Harrison, who had followed Maya onto the jet bridge, froze mid-step. His smirk vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed confusion. He recognized all three of them instantly. What was the CEO doing meeting a flight at the gate? A major security incident. A celebrity on board. Then he saw it. Richard Washington's gaze bypassed him, completely locking onto Maya. His stern expression softened with fatherly love and worry. "Maya," Richard said, his voice rumbling with quiet intensity as he strode forward and enveloped her in a hug. "You're here. Are you all right?" Maya hugged him back tightly. "I'm fine, Dad. Just angry." The word "Dad" echoed in the enclosed space of the jet bridge. Captain Harrison felt a sudden sickening lurch in his stomach, as if the plane had hit a pocket of severe turbulence. His mind scrambled to process the impossible. The girl in the hoodie, the fake VIP, the CEO's daughter. Brenda, who had poked her head out to see what the delay was, went pale. The color drained from her face, leaving a sickly, chalky white mask. Richard released Maya, but kept a protective hand on her shoulder. He then turned, and his eyes, the same intelligent, piercing eyes as his daughter's, finally fell upon Captain Harrison. The warmth was gone, replaced by an Arctic cold that could freeze jet fuel. "Captain Harrison," Richard Washington said, his voice dangerously calm. "My office. First thing tomorrow. 8 a.m. sharp. You, Ms. Jenkins, and the rest of your cabin crew. Don't be late." He then looked at Eleanor Vance. "Eleanor, please, ground this crew. Effective immediately. They are not to operate another flight pending a full investigation." The corporate jargon was brutal in its efficiency. Grounded. Investigation. These were the words that spelled the beginning of the end for a pilot. Harrison's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. His 30 years of experience, His sterling reputation, his unshakable authority, it all evaporated under the CEO's glacial stare. He had not just insulted a passenger. He had insulted his boss's daughter, and he had done it in the most public, prejudiced, and indefensible way possible. The storm had arrived. The 48 hours that followed were a masterclass in corporate crisis management, fueled by a father's protective fury. Richard Washington was a man who had built his empire on a single principle: reputation is everything. Aura Airlines wasn't just a carrier, it was a brand synonymous with luxury safety, and above all, respect. Captain Harrison had taken a sledgehammer to that foundation. The 8 a.m. meeting was less of a discussion and more of a tribunal. It took place in the main boardroom on the top floor of Aura's corporate headquarters, a vast space with a panoramic view of the JFK runways. Captain Harrison and Brenda Jenkins sat on one side of a long, polished mahogany table. Across from them sat Richard Washington, Eleanor Vance, Marcus Thorne, and the head of human resources, a formidable woman named Patricia Cole. Harrison had spent a sleepless night trying to formulate a defense. He had cycled through denial anger and finally a creeping, stomach-churning fear. He walked into the boardroom, attempting to project an air of wronged authority, but the illusion shattered the moment he met Richard Washington's eyes. "Before we begin," Richard started, his voice deceptively mild, "I want to make one thing perfectly clear. This is not a negotiation. This is not a discussion about a misunderstanding. This is a formal investigation into a credible report of passenger discrimination and harassment by senior crew members. Your full cooperation is expected." Patricia Cole then took over her tone, clinical and precise. "Captain Harrison, please walk us through the events on Flight 729 from the moment Ms. Washington boarded." Harrison began to speak, his voice strained. He tried to frame the incident as a simple safety dispute. There was a disagreement over stowing a piece of carry-on luggage. The passenger was uncooperative. I intervened to ensure we were in compliance with FAA regulations for takeoff. Marcus Thorne, the lawyer, interjected smoothly. "Was it within regulations for you to ask the passenger, and I quote, 'how you got this ticket?'" Harrison flinched. "I was merely trying to understand the situation." "And was it standard procedure?" Captain Eleanor Vance cut in, her voice sharp. "To refer to a first-class passenger as a fake VIP in front of other customers and crew." Brenda Jenkins began to crumble. Tears welled in her eyes. "Mark, the captain, he was just stressed. We had a turbulent approach in Denver the day before." She stammered, trying to deflect. "Your captain's stress levels are not the issue, Ms. Jenkins," Patricia Cole said, her gaze unwavering. "Your conduct is. Did you or did you not refer to the passenger as this passenger and she when directly addressing her? And did you attempt to intimidate her by brandishing a regulations card after the dispute was already over?" The questions were like surgical strikes, dismantling their flimsy defenses piece by piece. They had no idea that the executive team had been up half the night, preparing. They had Maya's detailed, composed account. They had already received a formal, unsolicited witness statement via email from David Chen, the corporate lawyer from Seat 2B, who had meticulously documented every word he'd overheard, and they had the most powerful testimony of all which was about to be delivered. There was a soft knock on the door, and Chloe Davis was ushered in. The young flight attendant was visibly nervous, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She sat at the end of the table, avoiding eye contact with Harrison and Brenda. "Ms. Davis." Richard said, his voice softening considerably. "Thank you for coming. We know this is difficult. Can you please tell us in your own words what you observed in the first-class cabin before takeoff?" Chloe took a deep breath. In a clear, steady voice, she recounted everything. She described the initial polite exchange between Maya and Brenda. She detailed Captain Harrison's aggressive intervention. And then her voice, filled with conviction, she repeated the exact words she had heard. He leaned over to Brenda, but he said it loud enough for everyone to hear. He said, "I bet she's a fake VIP snuck her way up here." She finally looked at Harrison. It was humiliating to witness. It was wrong. Captain Harrison's face went ashen. He had assumed Chloe's loyalty, or at least her silence out of fear. He had underestimated her integrity. Brenda simply bowed her head, a quiet sob escaping her lips. The rest of the investigation was a formality. HR began a deep dive into Harrison's and Jenkins's records. What they found was damning. While Harrison had a clean flight record, his personnel file was littered with minor passenger complaints over the past decade, many with a startlingly similar theme: brusqueness and dismissive behavior, particularly toward women and people of color. Each complaint had been handled at a low level, explained away by Harrison as a misunderstanding or an overly sensitive passenger, and ultimately dismissed by supervisors who didn't want to challenge a senior captain. Brenda's file showed a similar pattern of riding her captain's coattails, earning her the nickname the Captain's Shadow among junior crew. It was a clear, ugly pattern of behavior, enabled by a system that prioritized hierarchy over accountability. For Richard Washington, it was a devastating revelation. The cancer wasn't just in one pilot. It was in the culture that had allowed him to fester for years. This wasn't just about his daughter anymore. It was about his entire company. The unraveling was no longer just about 2 employees. It was about the soul of Aura Airlines. The official termination notice arrived, not with the impersonal ping of an email, but with the quiet thud of a courier envelope on Captain Mark Harrison's polished front step. The envelope was heavy, creamy cardstock, embossed with the sleek silver Aura Airlines logo. It felt more like an invitation than an execution order. He opened it with a sense of indignant curiosity, still believing this was all a performative overreaction, a piece of corporate theater that would end with a stern warning and a mandatory sensitivity seminar. The letter inside was a single devastating page. It was a masterpiece of corporate legalese, cold and precise, each word a carefully placed nail in the coffin of his career. It spoke of irreparable breaches of the Aura Airlines Code of Conduct, gross professional misconduct in the presence of customers and crew, and actions resulting in significant detriment to the company's brand and public reputation. It informed him that, effective immediately, his employment was terminated. His final paycheck would be mailed. His company credentials and access privileges had already been revoked. He read it 3 times, the words blurring into a meaningless jumble. 30 years. 30 years of perfect takeoffs, smooth landings and unwavering command. He had weathered storms over the Rockies, navigated volcanic ash clouds over the Pacific, and managed countless in-flight medical emergencies. He had dedicated his entire adult life to this company, believing himself to be one of its essential pillars. And it was all erased by a single sheet of paper because of a misunderstanding with a girl in a hoodie. His disbelief hardened into a white-hot rage. He snatched his phone and dialed his union representative, Tom Riley, a man he'd shared countless layover beers with over the decades. "Tom, it's Mark. They did it. They actually fired me." He spat into the phone, pacing his living room like a caged animal. "Washington is burying me to protect his spoiled kid. This is nepotism, plain and simple. It was her word against mine, and a senior flight attendant's. They can't make this stick." On the other end of the line, Tom Riley let out a long, weary sigh. "Mark, sit down. It's much worse than you think." "What are you talking about? It's a he said, she said." "No, Mark, it's not." Tom said, his voice flat and grim. First, it's a he said, they said. They have a formal notarized witness statement from the passenger in seat 2B. Turns out he's David Chen, a senior partner at a major corporate law firm. He documented the entire exchange, Mark, word for word. He quoted your "how you got this ticket" line. He quoted the fake VIP comment you made to Brenda. He described your tone as overtly hostile and discriminatory. His statement alone is enough to sink you. Harrison stopped pacing, a cold dread seeping into his veins. The businessman. He'd completely forgotten about him. And it gets worse. Tom continued, his voice dropping. They had testimony from your junior flight attendant, Chloe Davis. She corroborated everything. She told them she was ashamed of your conduct and that it was completely unprovoked. Chloe. Harrison whispered the name, tasting like ash. He could barely picture her face. The quiet one. The one who was supposed to be invisible, to just do her job and stay silent. The betrayal felt more profound than the CEO's anger. This is a witch hunt. Harrison roared, his voice cracking. They were out to get me. No, Mark, they weren't. Tom said, his patience finally snapping. They were, but you're the one who handed them the torch and the pitchfork. HR did a full audit of your personnel file. They went back 15 years. They found a pattern. 19 separate passenger complaints logged against you. The language is all the same. Arrogant, dismissive, condescending. Seemed to have an issue with my gender race. Remember the incident in 2018 with the family flying to Orlando? Or the complaint from the businesswoman in 2021 who said you spoke to her like a child? You brushed them all off. Management brushed them off. But HR didn't throw them away. They're not firing you for one bad day, Mark. They're firing you for a career of them. You weren't a pillar of the company. You were a lawsuit waiting to happen. There is no grievance case here. You're done. The finality of it was suffocating, but Tom had one last piece of news. And Mark, because the termination is for professional misconduct involving passenger discrimination, Aura is legally required to report the full findings to the FAA. It's not a flight safety violation, so they won't pull your license. But it puts a permanent flag on your record. No other major carrier will touch you. Your career is over. Harrison sank into a chair, the phone slipping from his grasp. It wasn't just his job. It was his identity, his pride, the very air he breathed, and it had all just vanished. For Brenda Jenkins, the news arrived with the same cold finality, but her reaction was one of implosion, not explosion. She dissolved into quiet, desperate sobs. Her entire professional standing had been derived from her proximity to Mark Harrison's power. She was the captain's loyal gatekeeper, and the role had given her a sense of importance she craved. Now he was gone, and she was cast out with him. She tried calling a few other senior flight attendants, hoping for sympathy, but was met with clipped, cool responses. The story had already ripped through the company grapevine. She was no longer a respected senior. She was a pariah, a cautionary tale. While their worlds were collapsing, a very different scene was unfolding on the top floor of the Aura headquarters. Chloe Davis sat, her hands trembling in her lap, in a chair opposite Richard Washington's expansive desk. She had been summoned by the CEO's office and had spent the entire journey there, convinced she was also being fired for breaking the unwritten rule of loyalty. Chloe. Richard began, his voice unexpectedly gentle. I asked you here today because I wanted to thank you personally. In a situation where it would have been far easier to stay silent, you chose to speak the truth. You demonstrated a level of integrity and courage that I fear has been in short supply in some corners of this company. Chloe looked up, surprised. I just did what anyone should have done, sir." "Perhaps," Richard said, a sad smile touching his lips. "But not everyone does. That integrity is the foundation of what I want Aura Airlines to truly stand for. We don't just reward seniority here. We reward character. Effective immediately, we are promoting you to purser. We are also placing you in our accelerated management training program. We need leaders like you, Chloe. People who understand that respect is the most important item on our pre-flight checklist." The shock hit Chloe with physical force. Purser. It was a 5-year goal, not something that happened overnight. Tears of relief and gratitude welled in her eyes. "Sir, thank you. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Richard said warmly. "Just continue to be the kind of person you are." Later that evening, Richard stood with Maya in his office, looking out at the endless ballet of landing lights at JFK. The anger of the past few days had subsided, replaced by a profound, weary sadness. "I've spent my life building this," he said, his voice low. "I thought I built it on a foundation of excellence. But I was only looking at the operational side, the on-time departures, the safety records, the profit margins. I wasn't looking at the soul of the company. That man Harrison, he was with us for 30 years. 30 years he was spreading this poison and I never saw it." "It's not your fault, Dad," Maya said, coming to stand beside him. "People like him are experts at hiding in plain sight. They use the rules and the uniform as a shield for their prejudice." "But it's my responsibility," he countered, turning to face her. "And I'm not going to let this be a quiet firing and a promotion. This has to be a turning point. I'm going to tear down the old culture and build something better. Something worthy of the name we put on the side of our planes. And I can't do it without you." Maya looked at her father, seeing the weight of his empire on his shoulders. But she also saw a new fire in his eyes, a resolve born from a father's protective love and a leader's rediscovered purpose. "What do you have in mind?" she asked. The grounding of one man's arrogance, she realized, was about to become the launch pad for a whole new flight path. The first salvo in Richard Washington's corporate revolution was not fired in a boardroom, but in a packed press conference 2 days after the firings. Standing before a sea of cameras and reporters, Richard looked not like a man managing a PR crisis, but like a leader who had been galvanized by a profound and uncomfortable truth. There were no evasive statements, no carefully chosen buzzwords. He approached the podium and spoke with a raw, unflinching honesty that sent a shockwave through the room. "Good morning," he began, his voice steady and strong. "On a recent Aura Airlines flight, a first-class passenger, who is also my daughter, was subjected to discriminatory and humiliating treatment by the captain and a senior flight attendant. Both of those employees have been terminated. But let me be unequivocally clear, this is not the end of the story. Firing 2 individuals is easy. It's a convenient way to signal that a problem has been handled. But the real problem isn't just 2 employees. It's the corporate culture that allowed their behavior to fester for years, ignored and unchecked." A murmur went through the press corps. CEOs didn't talk like this. They didn't admit to systemic failure so openly. "This incident," Richard continued, his gaze sweeping across the room, "has been a painful but necessary wake-up call for me and for this entire company. We sold an image of premium service and respect, but we failed to ensure that promise was delivered to every single passenger, regardless of their age, their attire, their gender, or the color of their skin. That failure stops today. Effective immediately, I am announcing the launch of the Horizon Project, the most comprehensive cultural and operational overhaul in this airline's history. We are not just updating a manual, we are redefining what it means to fly with Aura. We will become an airline where dignity is our destination and respect is our flight path. The Horizon project was as ambitious as its name suggested. Richard poured millions into its development, creating a new executive-level Office of Corporate Culture and Inclusion to oversee it. Its first and most critical task was the complete demolition and reconstruction of employee training. Maya, initially hesitant to play a public role, found herself drawn into the very heart of the project. She accepted a formal advisory position, finding a new purpose in the aftermath of her ordeal. She sat in on the planning sessions with the high-priced consultants, and it was her voice that consistently cut through the corporate jargon. When one consultant proposed a series of dry, data-driven modules on unconscious bias, Maya forcefully intervened. This can't be an academic exercise. She argued, her passion quieting the room. People don't change because you show them a pie chart. They change when they feel something. We need stories, not statistics. We need to build empathy. Drawing on her skills as a graphic novelist, she helped design a new curriculum built around compelling, true-to-life narratives. They created immersive role-playing scenarios where pilots were forced to confront simulated situations of subtle racism from a crew member, and flight attendants had to practice de-escalating conflicts rooted in prejudice. She insisted they incorporate anonymized audio recordings of real passenger complaints from the past, forcing trainees to hear the genuine pain and frustration in customers' voices. It was uncomfortable, challenging, and profoundly effective. Inspired by Chloe Davis's bravery, Maya championed the creation of the Courageous Crew program. It was more than an anonymous tip line. It was a fundamental restructuring of crew accountability. The program established a peer review system and provided robust legal and professional protections for any employee who reported misconduct. Furthermore, promotions and bonuses were now explicitly tied not just to performance metrics, but to peer-voted integrity awards. Chloe, now a respected purser, became the program's inaugural ambassador, her story serving as a powerful testament that doing the right thing was now the fastest path to advancement at Aura Airlines. Naturally, the changes were met with resistance. A current of resentment flowed through the more entrenched veteran ranks of the company. Some pilots from Mark Harrison's generation saw the mandatory workshops and new protocols as an indictment of their entire careers. An anonymous letter circulated mockingly, calling the Horizon project the woke-washing initiative, and complaining that pilots were being trained as social workers instead of aviators. Richard addressed this insurgency head-on at a company-wide town hall. He stood before thousands of employees and didn't mince words. "I've heard the grumbling," he said, his voice echoing through the vast hangar. "I've heard some feel we are overcorrecting. To them I want to say this: the culture of command and control that made this airline safe in the air somehow fostered a culture of arrogance and contempt on the ground. A pilot who cannot respectfully communicate with a passenger or a junior crew member is a pilot who may fail to communicate effectively in a crisis. Empathy is not a distraction from safety. It is essential to it. If you believe treating people with basic human dignity is a political statement, or if you feel these new standards are beneath you, then I respectfully suggest that Aura Airlines is no longer your home. The horizon we are flying toward has no room for that kind of baggage." The speech was a defining moment. It drew a clear, bright line in the corporate sand. A few dozen employees quietly resigned in the following weeks. They were not missed. The public and industry reaction was astonishing. After an initial dip, Aura's stock price soared. Customer satisfaction scores reached all-time highs. Passengers began choosing Aura specifically because of its public commitment to its values. Business publications hailed Richard's handling of the crisis as a new gold standard in corporate accountability, and other airlines, wary of having their own aura moment, began reluctantly reviewing their own internal policies. 6 months later, Maya was at a gallery opening for an exhibition of her artwork from her latest graphic novel. The book was a runaway success, its themes of hidden power and turning pain into strength resonating with a massive audience. As she sketched a small character in a signed copy for a fan, a woman in a crisp pilot's uniform approached the table waiting patiently. "Ms. Washington," she said, when Maya looked up. "I'm Sarah Jenkins, a captain with United. I just wanted to shake your hand." Maya shook her offered hand, surprised. "What happened to you on that flight was terrible." Captain Jenkins continued, her voice low and earnest. "But I need you to know the ripples from it have changed our world. Your father's press conference, the details of the Horizon project, it's all anyone in our industry has been talking about. My own company just fast-tracked a brand new training program because of the standard aura set. You forced a conversation that a lot of old-timers have been avoiding for decades. You made things better and safer for all of us. Thank you." The woman smiled and walked away, leaving Maya momentarily speechless. She looked across the bustling gallery at the diverse crowd of people admiring her work, and the full weight of the journey settled upon her. It began with a single ugly word whispered in a first-class cabin fake, a word designed to make her feel small, powerless, and illegitimate. But it had failed. That single word had become an unwilling catalyst, unleashing a chain of events that had exposed a deep-seated rot, elevated a courageous young woman, and forced a billion-dollar industry to confront its conscience. She had boarded Flight 729 as a private citizen, wanting nothing more than to quietly surprise her father. She had walked off of it, an accidental agent of change. Her father had built an airline that spanned the globe, but together they had charted a new course, navigating away from the storm of prejudice toward a clearer, brighter, and more dignified horizon. In the end, this story isn't just about a pilot's downfall or a CEO's daughter. It's a stark reminder that true power isn't found in a title or a uniform, but in integrity and courage. Captain Harrison and Brenda Jenkins learned the hard way that a career built on arrogance is a fragile thing easily shattered by the truth. Their fall from grace serves as a potent lesson. Prejudice is a poison, and those who wield it will eventually be consumed by it. But the real victory wasn't just in their punishment. It was in the transformation that followed. Maya Washington took a moment of profound disrespect and used it not for revenge, but for revolution. She and her father turned a corporate crisis into a catalyst for meaningful, lasting change, reminding an entire industry that its most valuable asset isn't its planes, but its principles. What do you think of Aura Airlines' response? Was it the right way to handle the situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of karma and accountability resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life drama where justice is served.